This is a truly frightening story, and it's so frightening because it can happen to any one of us. There are versions of this story online, and it's been embellished by creepypastas and fellow TikTokers, but this is the true version, and it's so important that you listen because I think people need to know about this. In 2015, a man posted to the Legal Advice Forum on Reddit looking for advice on how to accuse his landlord of breaking into his house. The reason why he thought the landlord was breaking into his house was because he kept on finding really weird, unusual post-it notes all around his house and things going missing. And he also felt like sometimes somebody was there hidden in plain sight. What was weird about these post-it notes was they were written in his own handwriting. He recognised that immediately, but a lot of them mentioned his landlord, which made him think that his landlord may have been coming in, drugging him, doing whatever to him, and he was writing these post-it notes so he would find them. There's nothing overtly scary about these post-it notes, but they didn't make much sense. Some of them were random to-do tasks. Some of them he couldn't even make out his own handwriting. It was like it was tailed off at the end. Some were broken conversation, but the problem is he could never ever remember writing these post-it notes. At the same time, the man also wrote that he was losing time and constantly feeling paranoid and foggy, and he could swear that he could see people in his house, but when he looked in the direction, they were never there. There was also a situation where he was convinced that he could see his landlord through his bathroom mirror. So this is why he took to Reddit to ask for legal advice onto how to start legal proceedings, because he didn't know if any of it were true, just weird things were adding up. Very luckily, one Reddit commenter noticed something quite chilling, and that was memory loss, paranoia, feeling foggy and hallucinations, and writing things down are all signs of carbon monoxide poisoning. The commenter said, leave your house and have your house tested for carbon monoxide poisoning just to be safe. Nothing else to lose, the man got his house tested and investigators found dangerously high levels of carbon monoxide in his house, and they estimated about one sleep away from going to bed and never waking up again. He wasn't being stalked by his landlord, he wasn't being haunted, he was being poisoned, and all of these weird events happened because his brain had to fill in the gaps. That I find really surreal and creepy is that when your brain lacks oxygen and you experience events and you can't remember them, it tries to fill in the gaps for you. This is why people experience these artificial hauntings when it's really just your brain and your mind. This is why I'm always on Team Skeptic. I know I tell lots of stories, but you can haunt yourself, and things around you, like carbon monoxide and certain gases, can cause you to see things, and it's so important that you recognise what these signs are. What's even more creepy is that his brain was recognising that it was being poisoned, and these post-it notes were prompts to get the landlord to check the apartment, to fill in conversations, because it knew something was happening. I think it's really weird that a common symptom is to write things down for carbon monoxide poisoning. How weird's that? I said there's lots of variations of this story online, but this is the true version of it. It often gets misinterpreted as a woman thinking that she's being stalked, and the base in the bathroom mirror is quite like a punchy part. But no, that's the real story. Get a carbon monoxide tester. Do it. You have to do it. I've got one. You get one.
Have you guys heard of entities with backwards goat feet? I cannot remember what they are called, but this is what this story is about, and it is so unsettling. So Isaac's family is Muslim, and because of his father's job, they had to live in the German Alps in a small village. Now, he said that the village is like surrounded by forest, and he said that during the day, the village is pretty boring, but he said it in like a good way. He said at night, though, everything was sharper. He said that sounds carried weirdly. Even normal things like footsteps or knocking felt louder than they should. It started with dreams. He kept dreaming about this narrow trail that is behind his house that leads up to the mountains. In the dream, it is always early morning, that kind of gray light that you get before the sunrise. Suddenly, he would hear knocking, but very slow and measured, like whatever it was trying not to startle him. When he turned around, this thing would always be there. It was tall, like uncomfortably tall. Its body was thin and stretched, and its legs were bent backwards, and they ended in goat feet that looked way too solid to be imaginary. He said the weird thing was, though, is it never rushed him, it never chased him, it would just stand there patiently, like almost like it was waiting for his permission. He said that he swears that this thing was like being polite, and that this weirded him out more than anything. Well, these are dreams, right? So he just brushes them off. Well, he tries to at least. But then one night, he's laying in bed and he hears right behind him. Now, this freaked him out, but there was nothing that he could do about it. So it continued for a few nights. Always 3 taps, always outside of his room, not aggressive, not loud, like almost intentional. And he would tell his parents about this, and his parents are just telling him that the house was settling, which this honestly made sense to him. But it sounded like the same knocking in his dreams. Same rhythm, same pauses, almost like whoever it was well-mannered. But one night he goes to bed, and he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning. His heart is racing, pounding out of his chest. He said that it felt like his body knew something before his brain did, and that's when he heard it. Slow footsteps right outside of his window. He said that these footsteps were careful, like whoever it was didn't want to wake the whole house. He decides that he's going to get up and he's going to look out the window towards the forest. So he gets up, he walks over to the window, and he is in shock, because there it was. The same thing in his dream was standing outside of his window. He said that this scared him so much that his brain almost lagged at first, like he wasn't processing it. He said it was even taller than he remembered, and it was almost brushing the lower branches of the trees. And the goat feet were planted firmly on the ground, not moving, like it was standing at attention. Then slowly lifts its hand up and just goes. He said that it didn't sound demanding, it almost sounded like it was announcing itself. Then it did something he did not expect. It spoke. Isaac. It said his name, soft but clear. He said that hearing this almost made him lose it. Like, this terrified him. He did not know what to do. He's just standing there absolutely frozen. And then it spoke again. And it said, "You can hear us?" Said it wasn't a threat, it wasn't a warning. It was almost like an observation, like it was impressed or surprised. At this point, he's like, no effing way. No, not today. So he starts reciting a yacht, because this is what he was told to do if anything ever felt wrong. While he's reciting a yacht, it tilts its head to the side like this and looks at him like it was curious. It does not back away immediately. Instead, it just 3 slow knocks, almost like it was saying goodbye in like a polite manner. And it stepped backwards into the trees, and he said it looked like it was being careful with each step, and then it just vanished into the darkness. He said after that night, the dream stopped, no more knocking, no more feeling watched. That whatever it was did not feel evil. It felt aware, respectful even, like it followed rules he did not know existed. He said he's fine now, but he still finds it weird that something so unsettling felt weirdly courteous. He does not open doors for knocking that he cannot explain, especially when it sounds careful, like it's waiting to be invited. So what did you guys think about this story? When I first read it, I was like, this is going to be terrifying. And then, like, there were parts that were terrifying. Like the part where he was awake and then heard the knocks. And the part that really freaked me out is when the thing was outside and he saw it, and then it just slowly lifted its hand up and just started knocking. And then when it tilted its head to the side, oh God, I can't. But it's weird that he knew, like, inside of his heart that it was being polite, that it was not malevolent. And it makes me think, first of all, that he definitely is sensitive. And the fact that it said, "You can hear us," just makes me feel like there's so much out there that we don't know about. Because, like, you can hear us? Who's us? He's just seeing one thing. So what else are they talking about? Like, it freaks me out. It freaks me out, but also I'm okay with it. Because, I mean, obviously there's so much more than we're being told. Well, we're definitely not being told everything. And B, that we just don't know, you know? So what do you guys think this was? And do you have any suggestions, thoughts, opinions? As always, please be respectful. I can't talk. And drop it in the comments.
Okay, guys, you're just gonna hang out in my kitchen floor with me tonight when we get into this story, because I'm way too scared to tell this one on the porch. Genuinely, like, we're gonna jump straight into it, but this is one of the scariest ones that I have ever been sent, and I'm not blowing smoke up y'all's hind ends. Like, it really scared me, and I usually go in order with the stories that I share, but I've got to get this one off my chest. Like, if I'm gonna be sitting here scared, y'all are gonna be scared with me, okay? We are leaving this follower anonymous. She said that part of the reason for that is that this story is just so traumatizing for her, and it made her, like, emotional, like, tear up even just telling the story to me. After reading it, I understand why. So And just also a quick disclaimer, I believe her. I genuinely do. And I get a lot of story submissions. Some of them, maybe they're true, maybe they're not. But the conviction in which she told it, the way that she wrote it, like, I genuinely believe that she and her family had an experience that traumatized them and haunted them, and that it was not human. We're going to skip my typical intro. I'm Ottoman Appalachia. Send me your scary stories. Add me on Facebook, same handle. Let's call this follower Callie for the video. Callie lived she said, at the head of the holler in eastern Kentucky, and she lived on her grandma's property. Now, Callie, in a single wide trailer. Her grandma's house is about 2 football fields away from Callie's trailer. She can see her grandma's house from her trailer. Her dad used to live in that trailer, but her dad now, while he's still on the same property, is in a different house. He's in like a field beside Callie's trailer. So all 3 people like living on the same property. And she also, by the way, Callie had a younger brother. Okay, this is important for context. So one night, Callie is asleep in her bed. She has to be up at like 5 a.m. for work. And she said that the phone rings. It's a landline phone, looks at the caller ID, and it's her grandma's name. And it's like 3 a.m. She knows something's wrong. So she picks up. She's like, "Hey, Grandma, is everything okay?" Her grandma's like, "Is your boyfriend home?" Callie's boyfriend works night shift, but he was not supposed to be home at like 3 a.m. And she's like, "No, he's not home." And her grandma's like, "Well, there's somebody or something, a man, on your front porch." Callie's porch light is on. So her grandma is literally like from her house looking at Callie's trailer and can see somebody pacing back and forth on the porch, and it's like right in front of the door. And Callie said that her grandma liked to kind of like spook and scare her, but never usually at like 3 a.m. via phone call, right? She's still, though, like, Callie has to be up for work at like 5 a.m. She's half asleep, like super groggy. She really thinks her grandma's just screwing with her. She's like, "Grandma, like, I've got to get in bed. Like, now is not the time for a joke." Grandma's like, "No, I'm serious." And Callie just hangs the phone up while her grandma is like trying to convince her that there is actually somebody or something on her front porch, like walking around. And so she hangs the phone up, she dozes back off, and as she dozes off, she said that suddenly her entire bed just starts vibrating, like violently shaking. It's almost like the entire house is shaking, not just her bed. And she said it froze her. She is like so petrified that she literally cannot breathe. She can't move her body. Her phone starts ringing again. It's her grandma. She picks up, and her grandma is now like, "Your porch light is like flickering and doing all kinds of weird stuff." Callie then hears her brother in the background of the phone call. Like, her brother and her dad are both at the grandma's house. And her brother's like screaming in the background, like, "There it is. I see it too, Grandma, like, I see it too." Then she hears her dad pipe in being like, Mom, like, I cannot get back out there. Like, something is after me, and it is on its way over to Callie's house." And so at this point, Callie is like beside herself. She is like petrified, and she's like, "Guys, what in the actual hell is going on?" So she actually breaks down crying because she's that petrified, and she hollers at her dad through the phone and says, "Please, like, walk over here and come get me." Her dad, who is normally not scared of anything, she said, tells her, like, I'm sorry, like, I am too scared to come outside. Like, I'm too scared to come outside. She's like, "You are my dad. Like, I need you to get over here and, like, come get me." And he's like, "Okay, I'm coming." And she's like, "Please knock on the door and tell me it is you before I get out of my bed." A minute or two goes by, and she hears pew-pews in the air. It's her dad, of course, like, pew-pewing in the air to try to like scare whoever this is off. And then she hears his voice at the door, and he's like, "Cal, it's me, open the door." She opens the door up, and her dad is standing there frozen in place, and he is staring at the field beside Callie's house, and he is repeating over and over, "Do you see that too? Please tell me you see that too." Callie's like, "I refuse. I am not looking. I'm rebuking it in God's name." Like, she's trying so hard not to like let it get into her mind and like shake her up. But eventually her dad is like, "No, I need you to look, because I feel like I am insane, right? Like, I feel like I'm going crazy for seeing what I'm actually seeing right now." So against her better judgment, she lifts her head up, and at first she doesn't see it, but then her eyes lock with its eyes, and she said it is a picture she will never be able to get out of her head. About 15 yards away, directly in front of them, Callie sees something that is clearly not human, although it was standing on two legs like a man. She said that it was standing in a ditch line, the ditch line that separates her driveway from the field. This thing was about 7 or 8 foot tall. It had a long tail, a completely black body other than the face, which was a dark burnt orange color. It had yellow piercing eyes, and it had this like horn protruding from right above its forehead, like one single horn. She said this thing is just standing there, like intently staring straight at her and her dad. She sees this, and I'm getting like chills saying this, y'all. She is so shocked. She feels like she can't even breathe. And she slaps her dad's side and is like, get in the house. So they go in the house. Grandma's house is out the window now. They're not going out there. They close and lock the door behind them. So they stay awake for the rest of the night in Callie's trailer, and every time that they look out the window, that thing, whatever it was still outside in that ditch line. It never came back onto the porch, never walked across the driveway. It stayed in the ditch line staring at the house, almost like it was waiting on them to come back outside. Callie said that it is, to this day, the most terrifying thing she or any of her family members that all saw it too had ever seen. She said that this thing stayed there until the sun came up, and that even after it left, nobody in that holler slept for the next few weeks. They don't know what it was. They don't know how to explain it. Something else that haunts her is that her dad, who lived in that field, had like a very tiny home. When he went back to his house from the inside was destroyed. She said all of his belongings were scattered, things were broken, like it had been like ransacked. And they have to believe that whatever this thing was, it did that to her dad's home. Not me being in a Kentucky holler telling y'all this story. It is terrifying. I've heard some crazy things, especially since beginning to tell your all's scary stories. I've never heard of anything like being described like that, like the burnt orange face, the yellow eyes, the horn. It sounds like demonic. It doesn't even just sound like some sort of a cryptid, like an Appalachian cryptid or something. I don't know what to think. I just know that it scares the ever-loving shit out of me. Y'all let me know what you think in the comments. Like I said, send me your spooky stories, and stay tuned for some more spooky stories.
Guys, I don't even know how to explain this one without it sounding impossible. Came across this story where a man shares that when he was in his 20s, he kept on having dreams about this woman, and her name was Aurora. Absolutely love that name, by the way. He said she had long dark hair, and while all of the dreams were different from each other, one thing remained the same: her face and name. It was absolutely the same woman in each dream. He said he even got to the point where he would wake up frustrated and confused and try to like Google her name, try to find anything that would explain why he was so connected to her. Also, side note, this is somebody that he has never met or heard of in his waking life. After a few months, though, he said that she stopped popping up in his dreams, so he kind of just forgot about it. Fast forward now to a few years later, he is at a gas station with a friend. He was just about to pull out and merge onto the highway when he gets a phone call from an unknown number. So he stops the car to answer, but nobody's there. So then all of a sudden he hears a honking sound. There's a really impatient person behind him. And instead of waiting the 2 seconds for him to pull out, they swerve around him aggressively and go onto the highway. Get this, as soon as that car pulled out around him onto the highway, another driver had lost control and smashed right into that person. So he calls the cops and waits at the gas station for them to arrive. And come to find out, both of those drivers did end up being unalived. He said that if he had not been interrupted by that phone call, he would have 100% been the person in that accident. So once he collected himself, a few hours later, he decided he's going to call that number out of gratitude. It rings 3 times and then it goes to voicemail. And what happens next makes his heart drop. Woman's voice recording comes on the voicemail and it says, "Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number and I'll get back to you." He said, "Head to toe chills." So the next day he tries the number again because he is just very curious at this point. And the woman answers, and he goes on and tells her about the whole story, including about all of the dreams he's had. And she's like, "I don't know how you got my number because I never called you." He is just like, "That is so weird," but asked her full name so he could look her up on social media. And when he does, it's her, the Aurora from his dreams. He is just beside himself. And he said that he believes it was some kind of glitch in the Matrix, but I don't even know what you would categorize that as. How freaking awesome was that? The woman of his dreams quite literally saved his life. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow for more creepy story time.
Story time about a woman who was hexed at her new job simply because one of her coworkers felt intimidated by her. The person who submitted this wants to be anonymous, so let's call her Amara. Amara had just recently gotten a job as an assistant teacher at a school located in South Africa. When she first got to the school, everything seemed okay. She made a lot of new friends and she settled in pretty quickly. Not long after, she noticed that one of her coworkers, who we'll call Celeste, always had like very weird negative energy towards Amara. Like anytime Amara had a suggestion or any new ideas, like Celeste was quick to kind of like shut it down. And it was almost like Amara was like getting on her nerves. 3 months after Amara got to the school, she got selected to be in charge of this huge event that the school was hosting. Celeste really did not like this. She made very public comments saying how, of course, they would choose Amara, like Amara's the favorite, like why wouldn't they choose her? Amara decided to confront Celeste, and Celeste pretty much just laughed it off and said that she was just joking. Those "I'm just joking" comments you should always pay attention to. That night, Amara had a dream that she was fighting Celeste, which felt really odd because as far as she knew, like they didn't really have an issue with each other. In the dream, Amara lost the fight. When she woke up, she felt this tightness in her chest, like she couldn't breathe, like this heaviness on her that she couldn't explain. The next morning, Amara woke up with her face completely broken out horribly, like she had never had this issue before. She ended up calling out of work the next day because not only was her face breaking out like horribly, she felt emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausted for some reason. As she sat there staring at herself in a mirror, like trying to figure out what was wrong, it finally hit her. She had been hexed. In order to confirm this, she went to her ancestral altar. She had an altar set up in her house where she asked for guidance. That night, Amara had another dream with Celeste, but in this dream, Celeste was crying hysterically. This was confirmation for Amara. She then received word from her ancestors that she needed to do an egg cleanse. At midnight, she decided to do this egg cleanse, and as she's like removing everything off of her, she could literally feel the weight lifted off of her. A few days later, Amara returned to work. This time her face was completely cleared. When she got to work, she noticed that Celeste couldn't even look at her. About a week after all of this, Celeste's life started to fall apart. She showed up to work completely broken out. She started having financial issues. She got sick, not just herself, but her child also got sick. Literally nothing in Celeste's life was going in her favor, so much so that people at her job were starting to notice. There were many people that were even commenting on how they couldn't stand to be around Celeste because her energy just felt so heavy. Right before the end of the school year, Celeste goes up to Amara and says, "You're a witch." Amara just says, "Okay," and walks away. How is Amara a witch when she was simply just defending herself from the hex that Celeste had put in her life? Everything always gets returned to its original sender, and you just never know who you're dealing with. So just don't do hexes, and then you'll be okay.
There are many people who believe that dragons are real, and there have been sightings across the United States, most recently in California. Now, the earliest report of a dragon seen in America was in 1882. A news clipping from the LA Times said that there was this train headed from Yuma to Los Angeles. And as it was going through this very remote desert area known as the Colorado Desert, they encountered what they described as a dust storm, and it was headed towards the train. Now, the passengers were panicked because they didn't know what was going on. And when this dust storm gets closer to the train, they see what appeared to them a 40-foot long snake with wings, and it is crawling on the ground at an incredible speed. It finally cuts in front of the train, but at the last second, the train nicks its tail. And it's said that this dragon reared up and it started to attack this train. And many passengers who had firearms on them began firing at this thing, and it took off into the sky. And that was known as the first sighting of a dragon in America. Now, even before then, there were Native American legends, old Cherokee legends of these dragon-like serpent creatures. But the most fascinating story that I've heard happened near Lassen Volcanic National Park. There were these two Boy Scouts, and they were on a campout. During the day, their troop actually discovered some elk that had been mutilated, ripped in part. And they had no clue as to what had done this. Later that night, the two Boy Scouts were asleep in their tent when this very large storm came about. And it was thundering and lightning. The rain was pouring down really heavy, and one of the boys had to use the bathroom. Well, he wakes up the other camper, and he tells him, I need to use the restroom. We need to go to the outhouse. So reluctantly, they went outside of the tent, and they started to make their way towards this outhouse. Well, all of a sudden, they started to hear this very loud, thunderous clap, and it was coming from the sky. But there was no thunder or lightning. What they seen was this very large serpentine creature flying in the air with large bat-like wings and a very elongated, long head. And they said that the power of the wings was literally creating this wind gust that was almost pushing them over. And this thing proceeded to blow fire out of its mouth, and it lit up the entire sky. And lightning started to crash all around it. Immediately, they ran as fast as they can to the outhouse, and they stayed in there until the morning. And the next morning, when they had woke, the troop actually found some very large footprints. So, are there dragons in California?
Weird spooky story time, and was this a coincidence or did he really get stuck in some kind of time loop? This is probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. I was driving to work one morning and stopped at a red light. I remember looking over and seeing this woman walking her dog. She stood out because she had really bright red hair and was wearing this blue hoodie, and her dog was pulling on the leash like crazy. She stopped for a second to fix her hair and then crossed the street. I didn't think much of it at the time. Later that night, I went to the store, and when I was driving home, I stopped at that exact same light. And I swear to you, the exact same woman was there. Same red hair, same blue hoodie, same dog pulling on the leash, and she stopped to fix her hair the exact same way I saw her do earlier. It wasn't just similar, it was like it was on replay. I just froze watching her because it felt impossible. I went home that night trying to come up with reasons. Maybe she just lives nearby and walks her dog a lot. But the way everything was identical down to the smallest movement still creeps me out. It felt like less like a coincidence and more like I had a slip into some kind of time loop. I've gotten stories like this before. I don't know if this one is local or not, but it is possible that maybe she just lives in the neighborhood, but it is weird that he saw her make the exact same movements. And I don't know if you guys remember, but I did one on Westcliff where that kind of happened. So I don't know. What do you guys think is happening? Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced anything like this, or send me your story.
So the picture that I'm about to share with you is a little weird. Actually, a lot weird. The people who are in the picture, they can't even explain this themselves. So the guy says, this picture is of me and my friends, and we can't make sense of what happened. I am the guy in the center and my hands are up. They don't recall anyone being behind them, like no one was there from their recollection. They cannot make sense of this picture. They've actually decided to just let it go and not question it, but they want to see what you guys have to say about it. So let me show you the picture. So this is the picture. And this is the hand in question. This guy says that both of his hands, obviously you can see the hand there, they're up. This guy's hand is wrapped around him. Obviously you see this one with a cup. And this guy's hand is down there and obviously cannot reach all the way over here. This is just a closer look. But whose fucking hand was this? It wasn't the guy taking the picture. I heard you. You wanted a closer look. This hand makes no sense unless somebody was back there. But again, nobody remembers anybody being back there. Wait, what the fuck is... Wait, is there something behind this guy? Wait, hold on. There's no one back there. It just looks like a paper on like the door or something. I had to look, okay? I still had to look. I wanted to see if somebody was back there. But yeah, what? What do you guys think?
In China, there are hundreds of these protected areas where Siberian tigers are raised. And in some of these areas, parks have been created so locals and tourists can visit the animals. One of these parks is the Badaling Wildlife World Animal Park, which in addition to allowing its guests to come and look at the animals, they actually allow their guests to hop in their personal cars and drive all around the tiger enclosure completely unsupervised. Despite the almost non-existent security, the park does have one hard and fast rule, and that is at no point during the drive-through tour should anyone ever get out of their car or roll their window down. In the summer of 2016, a husband, a wife, their young daughter, and the girl's grandmother decided to go to Badaling Park. After paying for an unguided tour, they opened the gates and the family rolled into the tiger enclosure inside of their white sedan. Everyone seemed to be having a great time until the wife in the front passenger seat claimed she was carsick. And so the husband slowed the car down to a complete stop, and then the wife promptly got out of the car. What happens in the next 30 seconds is captured in one of the park's security cameras that was trained right down at the front of the car. After getting out, the woman shuts her door and walks around the front of the car until she's right in front of the driver's side door. She leans in to talk to her husband, and as soon as she does, a Siberian tiger comes running out of the forest off camera, lunges towards the car, grabs onto her, and pulls her off camera back into the forest. The husband immediately leaps out of the car and he hesitates for a second because the grandmother has now opened the back door and she's jumped out as well. And so once they're both on the pavement, they shut their doors behind them and the two of them run off into the forest. Off camera, a gruesome scene would unfold. As soon as the husband and grandmother ran off into the woods, a second Siberian tiger that might have been drawn to the scene from the commotion or the smell of blood immediately leapt out and latched onto the grandmother, killing her instantly. The wife would survive the attack, but would suffer very serious injuries. As for the husband, he would escape with minor injuries. And the child who stayed in the car was totally unharmed. Following the high-profile attack, the Badaling Park was forced to put up more signage on either end of this driving tour to make it very clear to anybody going through that they had to stay in their car with the windows up the entire time. Saying that she wasn't properly warned about the dangers of this park, the woman who survived the attack, the wife who was dragged off initially, she sued the park for $2 million. In the wake of the accident, she claims a culture of rampant victim blaming has ruined her life. She's quoted as saying people's words were perhaps scarier than the mouth of a tiger.
You guys know the show Squid Games on Netflix? Sure you do. Today's case has way too many disturbing parallels with that show, using quote-unquote games as punishment, survival at any cost, profiting from literal dehumanization. It's hard to believe that the things I'm about to tell you are true, but they are, and they happened. With that being said, today we're talking about the mistreatment of not only human beings in general, but children as well. So if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, skip this video. I will see you in my next one. Take care of yourselves. I mean it. I love you. Also, I would say that today's case was on the harder side to research. So if I got any information wrong, if you know anything that I don't, if you think that there's something that needs to be said, comment it down below. We'll figure it out together. It's a humid day in 1982. A man is sitting on a bench at a bus stop waiting for his boss when suddenly a group of men in dark jackets approach him. They grab him by the shoulders. They take him. No matter how hard he tries to fight, he cannot get away from their grip. In 1980s in South Korea, this was known as the clean sweep. By the time the sun came up, that man would be behind a 30-foot wall topped with barbed wire, having just become a resident of the brothers' home. For the next 5, 10, 15 years, the world would believe that he simply ceased to exist. What is known as the brothers' home is one of the darkest, scariest chain of events in modern South Korean history, and it's often been compared to the show Squid Games because of its eerie similarities, which we're going to get into, so let's get into it. On July 20th of 1960 in South Korea, a new facility opened up its doors The purpose of it, to be an orphanage for children left unhoused after the devastating Korean War. It was called the Brothers Orphanage. The founder of it was a man called Park Chun-hee. I've also seen him being referred to as a different name, so I'm going to put that on the screen, but he was a man who presented himself to be a Christian philanthropist dedicated to helping society's most vulnerable people. For the first decade, by the sounds of it, Brothers did function as a legitimate orphanage. But in the early 1970s, as the facility expanded, something way more sinister started to take shape. Park transformed Brothers from an orphanage into a, quote, accommodation center for the unhoused. In July of 1975, Brothers Home signed an official contract with the city of Busan and became one of the government's many official detention facilities across South Korea. It relocated to a different area, a mountainside compound where a massive concrete facility would be built with walls that were 30 feet high. In the government's eyes at that point in time, this was incredible. This was a good thing, and anyone looking from the outside in could have probably assumed that it was a clean, well-organized facility meant to help people in need, but they had no idea what was happening inside of those walls. Between 1975 and 1987, an estimated 40,000 individuals passed through Brothers Home, and at least 657 of them would never leave alive. Around mid-1981, the former president of South Korea, Chun Doo-hwan, had received a report about unhoused people in the streets begging for food or money. And it was then that he issued an order. He stated that by the time the 1988 Olympics were to be held in South Korea, there should be no beggars or no homeless people visible on the street. He wanted South Korea to prepare to show the world that it had become a modern, prosperous nation. The poor, the disabled, the quote-unquote unwanted, they had to disappear. And shortly after, police officers were literally being incentivized to hunt human beings. A police internal guideline awarded police officers 2 to 3 performance points for each person that they brought in. Police were often pressured to meet their quotas that they had of people that they had to capture and take away. And if they brought in 10 or more people a day, they were rewarded. What that reward was, I'm not sure, but I guarantee that it would make you and me both sick to our stomachs. And what do you get when that happens? Mass kidnappings disguised as social welfare. Between the years of 1981 and 1986, as South Korea prepared to host the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Olympics, the number of people held in detention facilities jumped from 8,600 to 16,000. By 1986, Brothers Home had grown into the largest detention facility in South Korea, holding approximately 3,500 to 4,000 people at its peak. But here's the horrifying truth. According to a later investigation, over 90% of those taken were ordinary people going on about their normal lives. Not only unhoused people, but disabled citizens, children on the street, students, and sometimes just people who happened to be walking down the wrong street at the wrong time. A lot of people, kids and adults, were just grabbed, just taken when they were walking down the street. A van would approach them and shove them into this windowless van that was packed in full of other people with no light, no ventilation, no food or water, and no idea as to where or why they were being taken. And once they got inside of Brothers Home, they became invincible. They pretty much ceased to exist in the eyes of society. Like I mentioned, Brothers Home was a massive mountainside compound terraced into a steep hillside with high concrete walls that people in there were forced to build. Those assigned to build the walls were initially sleeping in tents during the construction and eventually then got to move into the facility. The complex contained over 20 separate factory buildings producing everything from pencils and fishing equipment to clothing and metal work, where everyone would be made to work and obviously without pay. There was also a church built and they were forced to attend that 2 to 3 times weekly. There was a hospital ward where sick people were sent to and locked up without treatment, as well as massive dorm buildings divided into what they called platoons. Each platoon held up to 120 people crammed into rows of metal bunk beds with minimal space, no privacy, and constant surveillance by platoon leaders who enforced brutal discipline. They were starved, fed only minimal rations that left them malnourished and emaciated, and of course any sort of sanitation at all whatsoever was deliberately neglected. The facility also locked from both the inside and the outside. That kind of gives you an idea of the setup, but let's talk about what the day-to-day routine was inside of Brothers Home. Brothers Home operated like a military prison camp. I really don't know how else to explain it. They established an army-like chain of command, and to avoid having to hire anyone, they promoted certain people to become people of power, creating platoon leaders and commanders who would then enforce brutal discipline on everyone else there. So basically, they would take the most aggressive people, give them extra food and some sort of wooden stick or weapon and tell them, quote, keep the others in line or you will be the one getting beat. quote. And of course, the only thing this did was turn victims against victims. It destroyed any hope of escaping the situation they were in because you could not trust the person that was sleeping in the bunk next to you. Those were some of the people that helped enforce the daily routine along with the other guards. Their daily routine began at 5 in the morning with a loud alarm in the dorms. Then there was a head count to make sure that everyone was still there. Then with your group, you had to march outside in unison. At 5:30 a.m., they had a mandatory dawn service. Wednesday and Sunday, they had to attend church, and afterwards, from dawn to dusk every single day, they had to do forced labor in one of the 20 factories. And let's talk about those factories for a second. So Brothers Home ran well over a dozen factories producing pencils, fishing equipment and fishing lines, umbrellas, clothing and shoes, woodwork, metalwork, you name it, honestly. And oftentimes, the products made were then exported to Japan and Europe. The entire operation was massively profitable. The victims would spend 14 hours a day, if not more, tying hooks to make fishing gear. Their fingers would be working until they quite literally could not feel them anymore. They manufactured items of clothing that were exported globally. And there was also construction because when they wanted to expand their empire, I guess, they didn't hire contractors. They didn't need to. They had plenty of people there that were being held against their will that they could use to help build private villas, new dorms, new factories, new buildings, whatever it was. According to Busan city government documents, at least 11 of the factories showed a profit by the end of 1986, if not before. Records show that Brothers Home should have paid the equivalent of $1.7 million to well over 1,000 people who worked in those factories, but no, instead they were paid nothing, just forced to work. Even children were in those production lines from the moment that they woke up to the moment they went to sleep, getting nothing in return. But working in those factories doesn't even come close to being the worst of it. And remember, a lot of the people in there were children. Children who were literally taken off the streets with no warning. So kids, children, 6, 7, 8 years old, I think, would be so confused having no idea why they were there, where their parents were, and why they could not go home. It sounds like absolute nonsense, but that is exactly what it was. The violence at Brothers Home was systematic, it was constant, and also sometimes fatal. To start off, guards would often get physical more times than not. They carried about things that looked like baseball bats, but were just like long pieces of wood that they liked to use as punishment. They would use that often on children in front of other children in what guards like to call correction rooms. And if anyone ever tried to interfere, it wouldn't stop. They would just also then punish the person who tried to intervene. There was SA happening left, right, and center at the hands of the guards, and for that, children were particularly targeted because they were the most vulnerable. There was also a psychological aspect to it. For example, there were mass graves visible to all of the victims there used as some sort of warning, bodies of those who had passed away because of how badly they were displayed as warnings. Every single day in there, every single person, every single victim woke up and went to bed not knowing if they would wake up to see the next day. One of the victims has said, quote, "From the moment you opened your eyes until the moment that you fell asleep, there was a," end quote. And then there were the games, quote unquote games. Punishments disguised as games, basically. I'll give you examples. Inmates were forced to hang upside down from the rails of the top of their bunk beds for extended periods of time. They had to hook their legs over the bunk bed and hang with their heads dangling. If they fell or couldn't hold a position, then they were severely with wooden bats or clubs. One survivor described, quote, "Every single person in that cramped warehouse-like room would have to stand up, climb to the top bunk, and hang themselves upside down with their legs hooked over the side of the top bunk," end quote. There was also forced fighting. Inmates were forced to fight each other for the entertainment of the guards. One survivor remembers feeling like they were just, quote, "toys for platoon leaders to play with," end quote. There was the blanket game, which meant that basically if anyone complained or questioned authority, they would then be rolled up tightly in a blanket. Guards and platoon leaders would then viciously kick and while they were defenseless, unable to move inside the blanket. A survivor who witnessed this happening to a different man recalls, quote, "The person had complained, 'Why are we here? Why do we have to endure this torture? Send us all home.' The leaders dragged him away, rolled him up in a blanket, and viciously kicked him. He never returned to the platoon, which means that he was dead," end quote. On top of that, there was also medical neglect. People were denied medical care no matter how bad of a condition they were in. There was also a psych ward in which patients received no treatment. It just existed to have a different place to lock people up. Substances were also thrown around, not for any medical reasons, but only to make the victims so out of it that they couldn't even register what was happening to them. At their peak, when things were getting just about as bad as you can get, it's been reported that there were up to 5 people passing away a day. 5 people a day. The number 657 is a number often thrown around when people talk about this case. That is the official number of people reported who lost their lives, but survivors and investigators say that that number is actually up in the thousands. It's so horrible, it makes me like physically dizzy to say all of these things out loud. And when someone lost their lives due to either mistreatment, malnutrition, whatever it was, their body was not returned to their family. Why? Because the family didn't even know that they were in there. In January of 1987, finally, a crack started to show. Kim Jong-un, he was a normal guy going on about his day when he decided to go hunting in the woods. That's all that he wanted to do. He literally was just in the woods to hunt. But then he looked through his scope and he didn't see an animal. Instead, he saw a group of guys that appeared to be guards. Quote, "I went hunting one day and saw people in shabby clothes working outside with guards watching them closely, holding clubs. I knew I had stumbled on a serious crime, so I started to investigate," end quote. When he saw them, people were working on construction, on building a ranch, and Kim took photographs of what he saw, men with large wooden stakes guarding what appeared to be prisoners. Kim understood immediately that something was very wrong, and he was determined to figure it out. He wanted to know what was happening there, because from what he saw, it did not look like anything good. Kim Jong-un was actually a prosecutor, so when he went back to his office, he looked into this a little bit more. He knew that he had to get a search warrant, and I believe that he did, because he then led 10 police officers in a surprise raid into Brothers home that same month, January of 1987. And what they found was beyond comprehension. Quote, "It was a perfect detention facility, not a welfare facility, locked from the inside and out. There was a hospital ward where patients who had clearly received no treatment at all were locked up. Almost every single person there was covered in injuries and they were confined in overcrowded dormitories." The raid team interviewed over 100 inmates, staff, and executives. The investigation concluded that most inmates were sound of mind who had been involuntarily detained and were being subjected to forced unpaid labor. It should have been the beginning of justice, but instead, it was only the beginning of a cover-up. From the moment that Kim began his investigation, powerful forces were working to shut him down. It was the year 1987. South Korea was only months away from the eyes of the world turning to them for the Olympics, and the president, he simply could not have any bad news at all about South Korea for the world to see. Prosecutor Kim was told to stop his investigation. He would later tell reporters, quote, "At every turn in my investigation, high-ranking officials blocked me," end quote. Evidence, quote unquote, disappeared. The media was told to pivot. And anything else that Kim tried to do to make all of this information public was just blocked. But luckily, he was able to do enough to get Park Chung-hee into the courtroom. And on February 4th of 1987, it was released that there had been mass illegal detention, forced unpaid labor, systematic human rights violations, and at least 513 deaths documented in facility records. However, even though that report should have sparked national outrage, instead it was largely ignored as South Korea's government continued to prepare for the Olympics. When Park Chung-hee finally did end up in that courtroom, he didn't even really face any punishment. It was like it wasn't being taken seriously. He was ultimately sentenced to roughly the same amount of time someone might get for a shoplifting charge. But then finally, shortly before the Olympics began, the facility closed. But imagine being 18 years old, you were kidnapped at 7, you don't know your address, you don't know if your parents are alive, you don't know what's been happening in the world, you have no education, all that you have is trauma from Brothers Home. Park Chung-hee moved to Australia, continuing to do the same kind of things that he had been doing before passing away in 2016. But all of the victims, now survivors of Brothers Home, they were left with nothing. A lot of them fell into cycles of poverty and homelessness. Others struggled with PTSD, illnesses. Many had no education, no job skills, no families to return to. For decades, so many victims stayed silent, but others refused to. On August 23rd of 2022, a chairman announced the findings in a press conference once they had finally looked into and investigated Brothers Home. The official conclusion was that between 1975 and 1987, the South Korean government was directly responsible for human rights violations at Brothers Home, including arbitrary detention and forced unpaid labor, torture, a lot of SA, and at least 657 confirmed deaths. And things that happened inside of those walls, barely, but they were officially acknowledged for the first time. In January of 2024, a court awarded 13 survivors a total of around 4.5 billion won, which is approximately 3.5 million in US dollars. It was partial victory for some, but for many other survivors, no amount of money can restore what was taken from them, years that were taken from them. Brothers Home represents one of the darkest times in South Korean history, and I think it's important to talk about because it's not talked about nearly enough. Anyway, that is all I have for this video. Let me know if you guys have heard about this. I'm very curious to see if you have heard. I hope I got all of the information correct. I really did try my best, but please let me know if I got anything wrong. But yeah, that is all for me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Also, sorry the lighting is bad. Forgive me. Love you.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Are there real creatures in this universe that walk chest and flesh? Real Of course there is. Of course. Literally, I made this TikTok just to talk about these beings. Literally. And like I can see a lot of people, especially like this guy, like he was just as confused as I was when I was a kid. When I first witnessed my first supernatural being, like something that is not human at all. At all. It doesn't move like a human being. It doesn't talk like a human being. Like nothing about it is shaped like a human being. And I'm gonna back him up like 200% because even myself, I thought I was crazy. I'm like I can't even tell another person what I just saw, what I just witnessed. But like my mom was a safe place. My mom was a safe place where I went to, and I was talking to her about these things. And then she's like, yeah, even myself as well. Since I was a baby, a kid, seeing these beings, interact with these beings, and they are 100% real. You are not hallucinating or, imagining things. And then it wasn't until like I actually moved to the United States that I'm starting to understand that like, yeah, these beings are actually 100% real. It's not just me who's just like seeing things, because I'm seeing here too in the US. Yeah, every day I go to the store, people just like with no face, like different beings, like when I look up in the sky, there's like different things like in the sky, flying in the sky. Same thing as if I was in Haiti all over again. So I'm telling y'all, these beings actually do exist. And one quick example, I made that video before. My first interaction with the supernatural was with my own family, my uncle. Yes, I have an uncle who was actually a shapeshifter. This dude would shift to like a shaped to like a horse or a goat. When I actually, got in contact with them, I actually was lost, and I thought I was not gonna make it. Something was gonna take me because I kept hearing voices, and I kept like, like feeling things like moving behind me, like, I was a kid. So I'm thinking my life is over at this point, just like waiting till they get you. And then here he is at a crossroad, a goat full of chain. I'm talking about chain over chain. And then he had like a nose ring and ears pierced, like earrings and stuff, like long earrings. And then it just didn't look like a normal goat. Who would do that to a goat? So I'm like, okay, that's the demon. That's the thing that's gonna unalive me. And lucky for me, this goat, started to literally show me the road where I was supposed to go. And long story short, I made it home just safely. And the next day I woke up, my uncle came into the room yelling at me, swearing at me, saying if he wasn't there, I wouldn't be here today. And he was so furious. And one thing that actually like was very like distinguished and very like noticeable, same chains all over, earrings, nose pierced, all of it, just like it, like, the goat was. And then he told me it was him at the crossroad who actually saved me. And then when I asked my mom, because I didn't want to feel like I was crazy, I was telling a crazy story, my mom said, yes, your uncle at night, that's what he does. He actually like turns into goat, turn into a horse, cheval in Creole. That's what, that's how you say it. And then he protects the area, his family, against other beings who's trying to harm, like, other people. So it's not, if I say that I believe this dude, it's literally an understatement. No, I don't believe him. I live his life.
Here's an urban legend that was based on a real life case. We've all either seen the movie or heard the story. There is a woman babysitting children. She starts getting these weird calls from a stranger. The unknown caller tells her to check on the children. When she does, they seem to be just fine. But the calls keep coming. They keep telling her to check on the children. The calls keep coming and it's really terrifying. So eventually she calls the police. They tell her that the next time they call, they're going to try to trace the call. When the police call her back, they tell her that the call is coming from inside the house. The end of this version depends on who's telling the story. Some people say that the intruder takes the lives of the children. Others say that the babysitter is able to get the children and escape the house. In some versions, the intruder is caught by police. When he's being hauled off, he tells the babysitter that he'll be right back. But the origins of this urban legend start with that of Jeanette Christman. This was the 1950s, and she was in Columbia, Missouri, and she was also a babysitter. Just a few days before she was to turn 14 years old, she took a babysitting job. While the parents were away, someone broke into the house, essayed her, and then murdered her. Her murderer has never been found, and it's never been solved as far as I can tell on anything posted online. There was one suspect, and that was 27-year-old Robert Mueller. He was a friend of both Jeanette and the parents that she was babysitting for. He was at a card game the night that Jeanette was attacked. He said that he was going home to take care of a sick child, but when police looked at his alibi, they realized he had never gone home that night. Jeanette had called police to ask for help, but they were never able to get the address. When the parents came home, they realized that the door was unlocked and the front porch was open, meaning Jeanette had let in her attacker, so she probably knew who they were. This case has gone so long without any answers for anything, and honestly, I just find that heartbreaking. But what are your thoughts on this? Let me know down in the comments and follow for more true crime.
If you ever felt like you've been talking to nobody online, like the internet is full but nobody's alive, let me tell you this theory that says the internet died years ago and everything you see now is basically bots keeping the lights on. It's called dead internet theory, and it basically says that the internet you think you're using isn't even real anymore. Not like it shut down or the Wi-Fi went off, more like in 2016, 2017, the humans left and the bots came in and basically took the thing over. And the part that's weird is people said that they noticed a shift, like suddenly everything became repetitive, soulless, controlled, trends started looping, and comments sounded the same, and then they started to sound like AI talking to another AI. The people say that 80% of what you see online now is generated and no longer being created. And when you think about it, you start to notice those random accounts that comment on everything. The posts with no real friends, no photos, no real personality, and those memes that be popping up everywhere with no original source. Some people think they're not real users, just placeholders like NPCs. And all of them are designed to make the internet look alive. And the deeper you go into this theory, the creepier it gets, because it doesn't say the internet was changed. It says that it was completely taken over by corporations, by government algorithms, all to control what's being talked about, the trends, and what people believe. So basically, you scrolling through a giant illusion where humans are the minorities now, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Be honest, do you think the internet is still alive, or do you feel like you noticed the shift too?
Why am I just now finding out that Ashton Kutcher was supposed to go on a date with a girl on the same night she was brutally unalived? So this was back on February 21st, 2001, and the girl Ashton had been seeing at the time was 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin. Ashton had invited Ashley to a Grammys after party and said that he would come pick her up at her apartment and they would go from there to this party together. Well, he called her around 8:24 that night, letting her know that he was running late. According to Ashton, he got to her apartment around 10:30 or 10:45, and at this point she wasn't answering the phone. Even more concerning is when Ashton notices that the security gate leading to her apartment was left open. So he walks up the stairs and knocks on the door to Ashley's apartment, but there was no answer. But he notices that all of the lights in the apartment were on, so he tries the door handle, but it's locked. So he goes and peeks into a window and sees what he thinks is a red wine stain on the floor. Despite all of this, he left and went to the party alone. The following morning, Ashley's roommate Jennifer came back to their apartment and found Ashley's body lying in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed 47 times. When Ashton discovered that Ashley had been unalived in her apartment, he immediately called police to let them know that his fingerprints would be all over her place since the two of them had been seeing each other and since he was there to pick her up on the night in question. And police never really look into Ashton as a potential suspect. suspect. They instead focus on Ashley's neighbor, a man named Michael, who would later be deemed a serial killer called the Hollywood Ripper for unaliving other women that lived nearby. Although Michael's DNA would never be found in Ashley's apartment, he was still convicted of her unaliving, and Ashton Kutcher was a witness in the trial. But where things get really interesting is years later, when Danny Masterson was exposed for being a terrible person. Shortly after that, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis's letters to a judge on Danny's case were leaked, and these letters were basically testifying to Danny's character, how they believed he was such a good person and a huge role model for them. Well, one of Danny's victims posted this on Instagram, saying, "Dear Ashton, I know the secrets your role model keeps for you, ones that would end you. Did you forget I was there? You were on speakerphone that night you called Danny on February 21st, 2001. I heard everything. I heard the plan. In my opinion, you're just as sick as your mentor."
This man would tell the courts, "Hey, please execute me now." Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ted Price. Viewer discretion is advised. This case will take us to Mesa, Arizona. Ted Jeffrey Price was born on August 6, 1962. He was born in Ogden, Utah. He was one of 4 kids in the family. He had 3 sisters. Ted was an avid sports fan who loved motorcycles. He had a soft spot for animals. He was described as an incredibly kind and very compassionate person. He was a really fun person to be around and really made sure everyone around him was having a good time. In 1985, he got married, and he and his wife would go on to have 2 kids. His children were 16 and 14 years old at the time this case occurred. Ted Price had wanted to become a radiology technician and was planning to go to school for it, which would have been in Arizona. An ex-girlfriend of his named Catherine said that basically he could move in with her in Mesa since it was near the school. But when Ted got to the ex-girlfriend's home in Mesa, he realized quickly that this is a problem. Ted had discovered that his ex-girlfriend's home had become a drug house. Not only were drugs done there, but they were sold out of there. Catherine would literally just do meth right in front of her kids. And that angered Ted. Like, why are you doing this in front of your kids? Why are you having your children in this situation? And he was going to do the right thing. He was going to go to the authorities and report her because this isn't right. They actually got into a fight over this, Ted and Catherine. And at that point, Catherine grabbed a telephone and she smashed it over Ted's head. This was on November 14th, 2002. Catherine then calls her current boyfriend, a man named Aaron Gunches. When he got there, he sees that Ted is basically unconscious on the floor, and so he asks Catherine and a friend of his to help load Ted into his vehicle, which they do. Aaron then drives Ted to a secluded location somewhere out in the desert and takes Ted out of the car, throws him to the ground, pulls out a gun, and shoots Ted Price 4 times, killing him. Ted's body wouldn't be found until 26 days later. It sounds like police were pretty quickly able to, at that point, discern kind of what happened and who did this to him, but they also couldn't find Aaron Gunches. But then they got kind of lucky when they pulled over a vehicle on January 15th, 2003, and they realized it's Aaron. This was actually a routine traffic stop. Well, Aaron took out a gun and started firing at the police officers. He didn't kill anyone, but he did injure a cop because the cop was shot twice. He then speeds away, and then a pursuit begins, and there's like 50 to 100 law enforcement officers trying to find this guy. They finally find him the following day on January 16th, and he is arrested. And he is then connected to the murder of Ted Price, where by all accounts, it sounds like he admitted to it. He said it was him, and then he was charged with capital murder. I don't see any mention of what actually happened to Catherine, because at one point it sounds like Catherine called Aaron to literally take care of Ted after she had struck him over the head with a phone. She didn't kill him, Aaron did, but I can't find any, I don't know, maybe I'm not looking hard enough, I don't know, but I can't find any records of what happened to her. Ted Price was essentially killed because he was going to report someone to the authorities who was doing drugs in front of very young children, trying to help the kids get out of that very dangerous situation. He was killed for that. That's why he died. Being a good person. This family man with 2 kids who had a promising future ahead of him because he was planning on going to radiology school. But his life was cut short at the age of 40. Aaron Gunches would go on to be convicted of the capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. In November of 2022, he had reached out to the Arizona Supreme Court and said, listen, you need to execute me now. I will sign my own death warrant, which he basically did. He said the victim and his family deserves closure. Then later down the road, he ends up withdrawing that request because he says that he had heard that it was basically torture to be executed by lethal injection. But it didn't really matter whether or not he took back his own request or not. He was still being sentenced to death. Which takes us to March 19th, 2025. And this was at the Florence State Prison in Arizona. His final meal consisted of a double Western burger, spicy gyros, onion rings, and baklava. He had no final words. At 10:33 a.m. on March 19th, 2025, he was executed by lethal injection. And Ted and his family got justice.